Welcome back to Harriet's Florida Kitchen. But today, well, I'm Harriet, but this is not Florida and it's not my kitchen. Today, I am guest cooking with my beloved sister-in-law, Caroline Plyler.
Hi.
But Caroline is no ordinary sister-in-law. She is a legendary cook, and I do not say that lightly. She is known across the state in Georgia, across the state in Florida, and as far as Berlin. So
Slight exaggeration.
It's not an exaggeration. It's absolutely dead true. And all of Caroline's friends, one of the reasons I'm having Caroline on is because she has many friends who are also cooks. And when they hear that she is cooking on my show, I will get a lot of clicks. This is great. So I asked her if she would make a cake that I have been dying to watch her watch her make for years. And that is the, where's the recipe, Caroline? What do we do with it? It's caramel, burnt caramel icing cake. As you can see, Caroline's recipes are a lot like mine, but we don't have Gray's recipe holder to put them in. Okay, so this came from
Miami Herald.
The Miami Herald, April 12th, 2001. Now, this was the burnt sugar caramel cake recipe, but Caroline uses this icing recipe, but it has things like Duncan Hines yellow cake mix, which we did not use. Also vegetable oil. Nope. We used the famous Swan's Down cake flour recipe on the back of the box, which is a 1, 2, 3, 4 cake. And bakers will know that this is a long time old faithful recipe. And it's called 1 because it has 1 cup of milk. It has 2 cups of sugar, 2 sticks of butter. 3 because it's 3 cups of sifted Swan's Down cake flour, and 4 for 4 eggs. So we are going to make the cake. Now we have a little warning. The kinds of things that can go wrong are humidity.
Well, the icing, if it doesn't
beat
well enough.
So we're gonna, and we do have a hurricane going on. A hurricane has just passed through, went from Tampa to Georgia, heading on up the coast. So humidity can make a difference, and you have to do the icing so that it's not shiny anymore, so that it's dull. So that could go wrong. We also are gonna bake the cakes, but the cakes can be a little weird too in humidity. So if this sounds like a lot of disclaimers in advance, it's because it is. So if anything goes wrong, we'll tell you what's going wrong. You know this is the program that screws up, so you don't have to. Okay, we'll get started. We'll actually show you what we're doing, and I'll do the voiceover in this new super professional way that Thompson has taught me to do. Okay, we'll be right back and get started. Okay, as mentioned, we're going to start off with the Swan's Down cake flour recipe, which is on the back of the box, and which of course will be reproduced right below this video, so you do not have to watch the video over and over again, and you'll be able to see the recipe, and also these are the ingredients that we're using for this. Now the first thing we do is we start out by putting the butter in the bowl, and we're using a KitchenAid stand on the counter, a KitchenAid stand mixer, as opposed to a hand mixer, which we make the mistake of using later, but this is the right thing to do. It is heavy duty, and you're going to cream the butter. So we use 2 sticks of butter if you're an American, and if you're not an American, you're using a cup of butter, or if you're not an American, I'm not sure what that measures out to. At any rate, we're using a cup of butter. You'll have to do the translations. I'll do the translations for you in the printed recipe. All right, so we do that, and we cream the butter until we get to a point that it's time to put in the sugar. So you put the sugar in a little bit at a time, and you really do cream it. It'll get crumbly, and that'll be fine. And you just keep on creaming and creaming and creaming. You stop from time to time. You push it down on the sides to make sure that you're getting, and also pull it up from the bottom to make sure that you're getting it all in there. And you just keep creaming. And it takes maybe longer than you think it will, but this is what it pretty much needs to look like, as you can see in the bowl. Next, you add the eggs. Again, those go in 1 at a time. Now you can crack them, put one in a bowl, put it in, crack it, put one in a bowl, put it in, or you can put them all in the bowl, but because you're not really whipping them up before you put them in, you can pretty well separate them out. I mean, you can pour them kind of separately, yolk at a time as it all goes in. You are pouring in the whole eggs. So you mix that, you keep on mixing that all around, and then you put in the next ingredients. All right, so we're going to do a teaspoon of vanilla and half a teaspoon of almond. Okay, you need to get ready to sift your flour. Now, Caroline did not have a proper sifter. She likes to just sift it in a kind of a strainer kind of a thing. As you know, I like a sifter. So first of all, we measured it out onto tin foil onto the countertop. Now, faithful viewer Stephanie sent a question and said, "Why do you do that? Why don't you just put it into it?" She's a great cook herself. She's from Wisconsin, where they also have really good cake bakers. So she measures it into a bowl and asked me why I put it on the counter. So I've asked every cook I know, and all my friends do measure it out right onto the counter. They measure it out right onto parchment or onto tin foil. And the beauty of that is, I guess, you just don't get a bowl dirty. That's the main reason anybody came up with. There's no particularly great reason other than that. But I also think if you use tin foil or aluminum foil, you are able to bend it and lift it around and kind of manipulate it better maybe than with a bowl. So anyway, I always measure out the amount of flour that I need and then sift it. And then, once the sifting is done, I measure it from the sifted flour and then put that aside into a bowl. Okay, you are messing up another bowl. Anyway, it's already sifted. You measure it out from the sifted flour, and then you let it stand by in the bowl. Now, the next thing is that you start to add the flour a little bit. You'll notice we're adding it a spoonful at a time. We're not just pouring it in. It's going pretty fast, so the first thing that'll happen, as you've seen in other episodes of Harriet's Florida Kitchen, if you do too much flour and it's going fast, it'll blow up in your face. It's not a great thing. It won't really blow up like the soda episode did, but it will fly all over the kitchen. So you put a little bit in at a time. Then you add a little bit of milk. Not a lot of milk, just some milk. And you do it so that it absorbs nicely. And then you put some more flour. And then you put some more milk. And Caroline says that the rule is that I forgot to tell you that we also sifted the flour and we've sifted the soda and the salt into the flour before we started putting this in the bowl. So now we're putting in part of the flour, part of the milk, part of the flour, part of the milk. And Caroline says, start and end with the flour. That's the rule. That's our cake baking rule. So you start with the flour, do the milk, start with the flour, do the milk, do the flour, do the milk, finally flour. So then, when you get to a point that it is super creamy and it's now really melded together very, very, very nicely, you're going to go continuing to scrape it off of the sides, and you get it to a good creamy place. And now you prep the pans. So you have 3 cake pans. You get out your parchment paper, and I think it's a good idea to fold it 3 ways. And then, so you measure it sort of against the width of the pans and fold it. And then you trace the pan onto the parchment with a pencil. And then you cut out those 3 rounds. And you then take the paper, make sure the paper fits. Then you take the paper out. You spray or butter the pan itself. And then you put the paper back in. You spray the top of the parchment, you put in flour, you shake the whole thing around, and then you also have rubbed the butter or the spray on the inside, on the sides of the pan too. So now you have a thoroughly buttered or oiled pan that is buttered on the bottoms, buttered on top of the parchment. There's no way this baby's going to stick to your pans. Okay, next thing you do, you're going to pour the batter I would pour it into the pans, but Caroline spoons it into the pans. When I asked why, she said, well, it just makes it, you're just sure that the layers are absolutely even. So we poured and spooned into those pans, and we didn't completely clean it out because we wanted to leave a little bit so there'd be enough
to lick. Now, I'm not showing you, but we then popped those cakes into the oven, 350 for 20 minutes, and then we proceeded on to the icing. Okay, the icing. Now, I don't want to scare you at this point, but this is really the complicated part of this whole recipe. Obviously, the cakes are pretty straightforward. So the icing comes from this recipe that we showed you at the beginning, and it involves basically 2 pans on the stove. You want to get a large, heavy saucepan, and I'll show you what we used, and then you'll see that Caroline does not really feel that it was quite high enough because she did want to put her candy thermometer into it. So you'll look at that in a minute, and the other one is that you want to get a small, heavy skillet. Now that you put on the back of the stove and you pour in the sugar, but you don't turn that on yet. Now, you measure sugar and a tablespoon of flour, and you measure the rest of the sugar and a tablespoon of flour into a big saucepan. Put your big saucepan on the front of the stove and measure out 3 cups of sugar and 1 tablespoon of flour. You pour all that into the big saucepan, add 1 cup of milk, kind of mashing out the lumps, stirring it around, add 1 tablespoon of Karo syrup, and you bring all of that to a boil on a high burner, on high heat, stirring it constantly until it comes to a boil. You boil that for 2 minutes. At that point, you can turn that down to probably medium or medium-low, but don't stop stirring it, boiling that while you boil it for 2 minutes. Then you move that off to the side for just a few minutes. You start caramelizing the sugar on medium-high heat. So that is in about a 6.5-inch wide heavy skillet. So you start the caramelizing, and you do just what we did with Christina's abuela's flans, which is it just takes a few minutes to do that. Watch it very carefully. It sits on the burner. Some people say you don't need to stir, but I don't think it hurts one way or the other. Anyway, so you stir that, it'll get a little crumbly, and then it begins to kind of turn, and it'll go quickly now, don't forget. So it begins to get a little bit darker brown, maybe a little darker brown than it usually does than you want for the flan. But while it's light brown, you can remove it from the heat, and then you take from the other big saucepan, you dip out about a half a cup of that mixture, stir it around, dip into the caramel. So you pour some of the original batter, put into the caramel, you stir that around, and you take about another half a cup, stir that around in it. It'll be great and exciting and boiling up and stuff like that. And then you pour all of that caramel with all the crud in it back in to the basic icing, and you stir and stir and stir. Then all of that gets moved on to medium heat onto the burner, and you bring it back to a boil. Now, you let it stay at a rolling boil until it gets to 243 degrees Fahrenheit with a candy thermometer, or can be rolled into a soft ball. Now, you saw me demonstrate how to do something into a soft ball with some problems, I might add, when I made the fudge recipe. But Caroline does like to use a candy thermometer, I think, for obvious reasons. It actually even says on it soft ball in addition to the temperature 243. So, but if you're going to do the ball part and you don't have a candy thermometer, you get a bowl of ice water, and when you starts to look like maybe you've done it for 3 or 4 minutes, start pouring a little bit of that. I usually have 2 or 3 bowls of ice water sitting side by side, because the first ones are kind of mucky, but when you put your finger in it, you can push it around and you can actually form it into a soft ball. Anyway, in this case, we used the thermometer, and this is when Caroline decided that she really needed a larger pan for this, that we should have started with a larger pan, because the candy thermometer is quite large, and it really needed to be able to stand up in it, and it's got a little clip on the back, should have been able to be propped up. So, anyway, we let it get to 243, boiling, and then removed it from the burner. At that point, we added the equivalent of 3/4 cup of butter. That would be 1.5 sticks, but they had been chopped into little bits. As you can see, we're adding them with the plate. But you only put in a few tablespoons at a time. Now, I am definitely a person who thinks, more is better, and I'll quickly add 4 of something or 10 of something. no, you cannot do that. And you can see I got a little sort of whipped up on this, and I started putting them too quickly, and it takes a while for it all to absorb. The butter just sort of floats around on the top, even though you're stirring, you're whisking, but you need to put them in slowly enough so that the ones you've just put in are really absorbed before you put in the other ones. Now, none of this is on the burner. This is all off the heat. So the whole process of doing this takes about 5 minutes. It'll feel like it's taking an hour, but it really is only about 5 minutes. Okay, now we decided we would get out the hand beater and start beating it. This was really stupid. You have to beat this for 7.5 minutes, unless you want to stand there for no particular reason at all beating this. This is a dumb idea. So we realized this a couple of seconds into it, since I was the one doing the beating. And we decided we would move it over back to the KitchenAid Serious Stand mixer on the counter. So the thing about that is, once you do all of that, once you get it, so you get it over there and you start you do it on of course the highest speed you can. That has to go for a full 7.5 minutes, and I think I pushed it a little bit to make it just 7 minutes. One of the ways you can tell that it's right is that it is no longer glossy. It becomes quite dull looking. There's no real reflection on it. But of course, that's not really definitive. So do it by time. Make sure it's not glossy, but also that you do it for a full 7.5 minutes. Okay. Now let's get back to the cakes. Now the cakes have been removed from the oven, and they've been gently cut around the edges and then put on the racks to cool thoroughly for several hours. At that point, you put them on a cake plate or whatever you're going to serve them on in order to be able to start the icing. Now, they have to be completely cool by the time you do the icing. So, we take the icing out of the bowl that you've done for 7.5 minutes, and you pour or spoon the icing into the middle of the layer, spreading it enough to get it almost to the sides, but not quite. And I asked why, because I'm somebody who really likes to spread peanut butter and mayonnaise and everything into absolutely the edge of the sandwich. Caroline said, no, you don't want it to strewl out the sides. It'll sort of bulge out, and it won't look right. So we put the next layer on, and we put it in the middle again, and then we finally had the top layer on, and we spread it around on that as well. And then we put toothpicks through the layers. Now, if it looks a little strange, that's because we couldn't locate our regular toothpicks. These were a little bit too tall. These are really cocktail toothpicks, so these are really too tall and a little bit too fat. But that was all right, because what you want to do is you want to make sure that the cake doesn't slide around while you're trying to ice it on the top and on the sides. So it was enough to stabilize it. So we kind of poured it on top, and we also scooped it on top. And it's got to be done enough that it spreads. It's got to still be soft enough that it spreads, but you don't want it to be so soft that it strewls down the sides and puddles in the bottom, which kind of was the situation we had. Had we gone that extra half minute, it would not have done that by the next morning. Anyway, we did ice it. It was still stiff enough to be able to ice it, and you'll see that it sort of melts together rather nicely. So we iced all around the sides from the top. Some of it was sort of puddling in the bottom, so we picked some of that up, put it around on the sides. And then we decided we would let it sit overnight before we had some of it, and we did not put a top on it until late that night. We didn't want any of it to steam or get softer. So the next day that's what you see next, is the next morning we're tying the cake.
Okay, so here we are the next morning, and we are not happy necessarily with the way this is drooled onto the side, but we think it's going to be fabulous anyway. We've even sort of picked some up off the side and moved it over here. We actually filmed this a couple of times before, but it didn't take. So Caroline thinks that the reason that this icing maybe streuled to the side is because we needed to do it on about another minute. Okay, so it happens that we've already cut into it, and as you can see, it looks amazing, looks incredible. But, of course, tasting it is the thing. So, we have to taste it for the third time. How bad is that? And it's still really good. Okay. Caroline thought maybe these were too little, too thin. And we took, so good. When we took them out of the oven, she thought they hadn't risen enough. So we think what might have happened is because we kind of took a little, we had a little outing. We made this stuff in the mixer, which you saw, and then we took a little time out to go for beauty treatments and shopping, which I think is important, maybe more important than cake. No, nothing's more important than cake.
2 hours was a little much.
It was a little much. So what we should have done when we came back was we should have whipped it up some more in the mixer, which it was still in, and then poured it in. But anyway, we think it's wonderful, and we think you'll think it's wonderful too. It's not an easy cake, but it is a delicious cake. And so this is Harriet and
Caroline
saying goodbye from Georgia. Hurricane's over, we're safe, and we're in Caroline's kitchen. Next time we'll be back in Harriet. So thank you for watching Harriet's Florida Kitchen.